Hey guys, this is Noah with Sparksight, and I'm here bringing you another video on the wonderful process of putting together a computer. So today we're going to be focusing on the software side of things. So we've made previous videos before about picking out parts, showing what they do and how they interact, and then also assembling them together. But we had some people still asking questions about the process of actually getting Windows installed on your computer, setting up all your drivers, making sure everything's good to go. So that's the thing I want to talk about here today. But this could apply more generically because there's multiple reasons why you might want to install Windows on a computer. Yeah, if you've just built one and it's a blank slate and you want to put an operating system on it, that's usually a pretty good reason. But there are also times when you might want to take an existing computer that you've used for a while and reformat it or wipe the main drive and reinstall Windows on top of that. There are a couple of methods of going about this. Back in the day, you would use a disk drive, but most computers don't have that anymore. So nowadays, if you order Windows online, they'll usually either ship you a USB drive, or you can just use your own USB flash drive. It has to be at least 8 gigabytes of size, but anything larger should work as well. The interesting thing about the way this works is that if you just go online and search Windows 10 installation media and go to usually this first link, download Windows 10 disk image, the official Microsoft website actually has a place where you can download a tool which will create a Windows installer. So for obvious reasons, you're going to need at least one other computer to create this installation media. So if I take my USB drive here and plug it into my computer, it opens up just as a blank drive since I don't have anything on there. But now if I go and I run this tool, you're presented with an option here. You can choose to either upgrade this PC now or to create installation media. We want to do create installation media. And then it's going to go through, format that drive, wipe it, and then put the installation media on it. So yeah, it really is that easy to get your hands on a Windows installer. Microsoft makes the installer readily accessible to everyone, and anyone can install Windows onto any computer. What you won't have is an activation code or a license code, and this is what unlocks a couple of key features within Windows. That is what you'll get when you actually spend money on Windows, but they thankfully make it very easy to do all of this from home. Okay, cool. So it's done creating the installation media, so you just hit finish. Now I'm just going to shut down the computer and get ready to install Windows. Do recognize that if you're installing Windows on an empty drive that has nothing else on it, then yeah, go right ahead. But if it's a drive that has other things already on it, maybe it's a drive that you already installed Windows onto or just has programs and files or photos or project, anything, get those off if you want to keep them, because installing Windows on a drive completely wipes it and removes everything that was on it and then replaces it with the Windows installation. Disconnect all extraneous drives. Everything in this computer that isn't relevant to you installing Windows, basically everything other than the main boot drive, disconnect it. So if this is a brand new blank slate computer with a bunch of empty drives, this won't be as big of a deal, but I still recommend it. But it's super important if you have any of the drives in here like I do, which already have stuff on them, project files and stuff, which you would prefer not to overwrite. So I have both of these, which we're not going to need, these two solid state drives, and then as well this hard drive over here. It's just a really good idea because once we start installing Windows, there's going to be a point where it asks where we want to install it. And if you had all of those drives connected, you would have just seen a bunch of arcane drive 0, drive 1, 1B, 1, 2, 2, 3. It can be weird, and you don't want to accidentally format a drive that has some important stuff on it. So just disconnect it and it'll be much safer. So now make sure your Windows installation media is plugged in. Most modern motherboards have a button that you can press while it's booting up that gives you a prompt where you can choose what you want to boot from. By default, it's going to go with wherever it notices a Windows installation, but when you have this USB drive in, it might not know where to go. So in our case, we need to tell the motherboard where to boot from. In this motherboard's case, we do that by, while the computer is turning on, tapping the F12 key over and over again. The specific button for your motherboard might be slightly different, so I recommend consulting your motherboard manual to see what options it has available. So in our case, press the power button, tap F12 over and over again, and this presents us with a set of options here. We can see the Samsung SSD 970 EVO, that would be the drive we're going to install Windows onto, and then a couple of other options down here for the SanDisk Cruiser, which is the USB drive. So I'm just going to click on this one here. Takes just a second, but it should, if you did it correctly, boot into the Windows installer. It's going to look pretty garbage because it doesn't have any graphics drivers or anything, but set your language and whatnot, hit next. You also have this option down here, repair your computer, because you can use this Windows installation media as a way to diagnose problems with your computer if it isn't booting up as well. It's great to have one of these around just to use for troubleshooting and whatnot. Hit install now. So this is where you put in your Windows activation or license code. This is the long string of digits that came with Windows whenever you bought it or whatever. It's usually just listed out on the packaging, or if you buy it digitally on Amazon, it'll just come in an email. Note that you don't actually need to stick in a Windows key when you do the first installation. You can actually click right here where it says, I don't have a product key. And if you do that, then it'll just go through install Windows like normal and you'll end up on a normal desktop. There's only a couple pieces of functionality that are missing. You can't change the desktop background. It'll constantly bug you about activating Windows, and there's going to be a watermark in the bottom corner that says Windows isn't activated. And that's actually what I'm going to do here, because in my specific case, I'm not going to be keeping this installation. I'm just going to remove it when I'm done here, so there's no need to put in a key. But just know that if you don't have a key right away, it is possible to install and test Windows without actually having bought it yet. Obviously, the installer doesn't have an internet connection right now, so it can't validate whether or not this code has been used so many times before. But what it is able to do is, in the same way that credit card numbers can be confirmed to be valid credit card numbers, this can do the same thing. It knows whether or not it is a correct license code. But once it eventually connects to the internet, it's able to activate it properly. Windows works some weird magic behind the scenes, and even if I were to not put in the key here, there's a good chance that it would still activate later. And it does that because somewhere in Microsoft servers, it's keeping track of the hardware IDs of the stuff in this computer. So when it reactivates later, it recognizes usually the motherboard and some other key components, and it's able to reactivate. But if I were to keep switching out parts from this computer, eventually it might not activate. So just overall, it's a good idea when you get your key from wherever you get it from to just have it in a place that's safe that you can get to later if you need to. So I'm just going to click on I don't have a product key. Just as a quick aside, there are a couple of different versions of Windows that are minimally different from one another. There's not that much difference between the Pro version and the Home version of Windows. It's mostly just some extra administrative features. It makes no performance difference in any gaming or editing workflows, so there's no reason to get the Pro version unless you specifically want those features. There's also 64-bit and 32-bit versions of Windows. The 32-bit version is the older one, and it's limited to only using up to about 4 gigabytes of system memory. So that's way too little for editing. So the 32-bit version is straight out, and I'm pretty sure it's being completely phased out, like it's becoming harder and harder to buy or get access to. So get the 64-bit version of Windows, preferably the retail version, and probably just the home version, and you'll be good to go. And at this point, I can choose between either upgrading Windows or doing a custom or a clean install of Windows. This would be the same thing where it would keep all the files and settings and applications in place, but if you're installing Windows for the first time, you'll want to do the clean install. And the clean install is the one that's really going to refresh everything anyway, so that's what we're going to choose. So you can see here, there's a couple of partitions available for it to be installed on. Partitions are essentially subdivisions of a hard drive where you kind of build like chunks, like you're putting fences between different parts of the hard drive and sectioning them off from one another. Sometimes it's done automatically for system reasons, but we don't need any of those. We're just getting rid of all of them and reducing it to one big block. Drive 0, partition 1 and partition 2, that's the NVMe drive that we're going to install Windows onto. And you can tell because it says total size here, 500 gigabytes. This second one, drive 1, partition 1, ESD, USB, 7.5 gigabytes, is the drive that the Windows installer is on. That's the flash drive. So in this case, we're going to want to install on drive 0. If this was a empty drive that had nothing on it, it would just say something like drive 0 unallocated space. And if that's what yours is, then just click on it and hit next. If you have something like this, where it's clear there's already some partitions on there, there's already some data on there, what you do is you click on these and you hit delete. And once you hit OK here, it's wiping the drive. So be very confident that what you're about to do is what you want to do. Hit OK. So delete this one as well. OK. So now we have drive 0, unallocated space, 465 gigabytes. It's perfect. Exactly what we want. One big block. So we click on that and hit next. And now it's going to begin the process of installing Windows. And long gone are the days of having a disk drive installing onto a hard drive. That was super slow. Nowadays, installing from a flash drive to an internal solid-state drive, really, really fast installation time. I could probably install Windows 3 or 4 times in the same time it takes to render some of the projects that I work on, which I don't know how I feel about that. So once it's done, it's going to automatically restart. Usually, it should figure itself out and boot directly into the new Windows installation. Though in some configurations, it'll boot right back into the flash drive, and you'll go right back into the installation thing where we were before, and you'll be like, wait, what am I supposed to do? What you should do in that situation is shut down the computer, unplug the flash drive, and turn it back on. At this point in time, we do not need the installation media anymore because all of the files that it needs have been transferred onto the drive that you're installing Windows on. But it still has some more configuration to do and some stuff that we're going to have to tell it what we want and don't want. During this process, it may restart a couple of times, which is perfectly normal. Okay, so a couple of basic questions. Give it your location, I suppose. Make sure you select the right keyboard layout. No, I don't want a second keyboard. So Windows is now presenting us with the option to connect to an internet connection. And if we do that, then Windows is going to be able to start downloading potentially a bunch of updates that it needs to be running smoothly and up to date. Now there's kind of two different philosophies at play here, because if we allow Windows to do this, it's going to go through and start installing all the drivers that it needs as well. Drivers are basically little pieces of software that allow Windows to most efficiently and effectively utilize the specific components in your system. So right now, Windows only somewhat knows how to use the graphics card, motherboard, and processor effectively. If we just left it like that, we'd have horrible performance all over the place, and the resolution of the screen and a bunch of other things would just look like garbage. So we do need to install those. But some people don't like to allow Windows to do that for them because Windows doesn't always install the most recent or the most up-to-date drivers, specifically when it comes to graphics card drivers, though this is kind of a holdover from older times when Windows was really bad about doing this. Nowadays, Windows is much better, particularly when it comes to like chipset and like Ethernet drivers and stuff like that, of just getting them close enough, good enough. So for most people, if this is your first time doing this, I recommend just connecting to your internet network here and just moving on with life, letting Windows handle most of it. We are going to come back later and make sure that the graphics card driver is up to date because that is very important. So let's connect here. Then we just hit next. It's going to start checking for updates. This is where it then gives us the opportunity to log into a Microsoft account. I personally, particularly because this is a work computer that multiple people might use, I just do an offline account. And so if you click here on offline account, it's going to be like, are you sure you don't want a Microsoft account? I'll click no. If you do an offline account, you can just name it whatever you want. I'll just put Noah. Hit next. Well, okay, so I freaked out there for a second because I thought the computer just shut off. But what actually happened was Windows in the background was installing drivers, and it just got the video card driver installed, which is why the screen suddenly looks a lot better and less garbage. The privacy settings here, I recommend just disabling all of them, and a lot of PC builders do this as well. I can't tell you necessarily what you should do, but I usually just disable all of these. It doesn't remove any important features. So then you'll just have to wait a couple more minutes as Windows does some last-minute finalization. So here we are on the Windows desktop. And interestingly, I'm noticing that it is in fact an activated version of Windows. Yes, Windows is activated with a digital license, because like I was saying, Windows has already been installed on this computer, so even though it's on a different drive, Microsoft, the servers were able to recognize that this computer has already been activated, which is pretty cool. So the thing we want to check now is if the video card drivers are up to date. Most likely they won't be. So the way you do that is going either to the NVIDIA or the AMD website. In this case, it's an NVIDIA card. So I'm going to go download drivers, GeForce, select your specific card, and then you can choose between either the Game Ready driver or the Studio driver. The Game Ready driver is the most recent up-to-date version of the video card driver, and that's the one that's optimized for the most performance in the newest video games. So if you're doing gaming at all, that's definitely the one you want to get. The Studio driver is a little bit older usually, but it's more tested, more stable is kind of the selling pitch for it. And it's one that they recommend for people that are geared just towards content creation. So then you can see here the version number listed, 446.14. If I right-click anywhere on the desktop and go into the NVIDIA control panel, and there's an AMD equivalent as well, and you can see right here on the front, it tells you what version of the driver it is that you have installed. And this one is 441.66. So this is the version Windows decided to install for us while we were going through all those other steps. If we want the most performance and the most stability, usually we want to make sure we have the most recent driver installed. With that being the case, let's download this from the NVIDIA website. So once it's done downloading, we open it up, click yes here, and click OK. If you want to stop those annoying pop-ups from continuing to appear on screen every single time you try to install or change anything on your computer, the trick for that is to open up the Windows Start menu, search for UAC or User Account Control Settings, open that up, and swing this little thing down to Never Notify, and hit OK. And it's going to try one more time. You hit yes, and now you won't ever see that annoying message ever again. So as we begin the process of installing the graphics driver, it gives us the option to just install the graphics driver or to include the NVIDIA GeForce Experience app, which is primarily targeted at optimizing games. So if you're just doing video editing and content creation, you probably don't need that. I sometimes install it just because it's a thing that reminds you whenever there's an updated driver, but you could also just remember yourself as well. So it's up to you. And then for this, make sure, because we're removing an old driver and trying to put this new one, we don't want to just install it on top of the old one. So it's usually good practice to hit Custom, Next, and do Perform a Clean Installation. This will completely remove the old version of the driver that Windows installed and add this new one in its place. So usually it's just going to ask you to restart when it's done installing. Technically speaking, it doesn't truly completely remove the old version of the driver, and if you do run into problems, which can sometimes in rare cases arise from multiple versions of drivers being installed on previous ones, there's a great tool called Direct Driver Uninstaller online, or DDU, which just allows you to completely remove an old version of a driver and then install the new one. It's definitely a good thing to look into if you're running into weird driver issues. So that should be it. We should have most of the drivers up to date and installed. If you're running into any weird issues where it just seems like maybe the USB devices aren't working correctly or your internet isn't working quite right in your Ethernet connection or something like that, then it's possible that Windows didn't get all of the drivers installed correctly. So if that's the case, it's a good idea to head on over to the motherboard manufacturer's website of whatever motherboard you got. There should be a whole bunch of different drivers here, and if something's giving you trouble, just download the most recent version of that particular driver, whether it be audio or chipset, and install that and see if that works. A good way to check and see what might be giving you a problem is to head over to the device manager. You just search device manager down here, and then it'll pop up here. And if something isn't working, it'll usually be flashing, or there'll be like an exclamation mark next to it. And so if there's like a thing next to network adapters that says that it isn't working properly, then you should probably go over here and download the LAN or local area network driver, or maybe the wireless driver or something like that. And then lastly, a cool little thing I just want to show you is this great little program called Ninite, which is, you just go to this website, ninite.com, and it's essentially an app that allows you to install a whole bunch of little simple programs all at once. So maybe I already have Chrome installed, but let's say we want Firefox. It's mostly open source software. Winderstat is a great program that allows you to see what's taking up space on your hard drives in a visual way. Zoom, Discord maybe, Skype maybe, VLC, iTunes, Audacity, 7-zip for compression, and then Google Earth. Why not? And then if I hit Get Your Ninite, it'll give me a exe file that when I click on it, will prepare a setup that will install all of those programs in one fell swoop, which is really convenient and saves you a lot of time of having to go through and download each of those programs individually. So when it comes to getting Windows set up and functional, that's pretty much it. At this point, all you really would need to do is install whatever editing applications you might be using or whatever games you might want to play and then test it out. Now would also be a great time to head over to Puget Systems website and check out their benchmarking tool. So after you get After Effects up and running, you can run their After Effects benchmark tool to see if your computer is up to snuff with similar computers. You can go onto the forums and look at whether or not people with similar settings and similar configurations are getting the same result as you. If they are, then you know you're good to go. You've set up your computer right and all is dandy. It's also good practice to download some kind of temperature monitoring program. So in my case, I'm going to do hardware monitor. So this little program, it looks intimidating at first, but if you scroll down here, you can see under CPU, it shows the CPU Intel Core i9, and then the temperatures of all the different cores. Really, you just want to be looking over here at the max temperature. So I usually, the first thing I do once I get to this point is get Premiere or After Effects up and running, run their benchmark, and leave this running in the background throughout the benchmark, and try and make sure that those temperatures don't peak too high. Most CPUs will thermal throttle when they reach 100 degrees Celsius, which is very hot. They'll protect themselves from being damaged, but they will slow down if they hit that temperature. If you installed your heatsink correctly when you built your computer, or if you just have a well-designed computer, this shouldn't ever be a problem. But it's good to just check, and if the temperatures are getting really high, like into the high 80s, into the 90s as their maximum temperatures, it might be something to look into. Maybe try reseating the heatsink or something of that sort. So that's pretty much it. That's all the stuff that I like to do whenever I'm setting up a computer to be used in any kind of capacity, whether it's for editing stuff or for gaming or for both. I hope this video was useful for you and that it walked you through steps and maybe gave you some information that you didn't have before. If it was helpful, then definitely consider giving us a like and maybe subscribing to us. And if you have any other questions or any thoughts and tips of your own, definitely feel free to leave them in the comments below. Thanks, and see you next time.